Canada Post and the Canadian Union of Postal Workers remain unable to reach an agreement. Canadians are rightly fed up. I am making this decision to protect the interests of all Canadians. It is not a decision I take lightly, but in this situation, it is the right one.
The federal government has intervened in the Canada Post strike, laying the groundwork to send postal employees back to work. The strike has lasted more than 4 weeks, stretching well into the holiday season. For the latest, I'm joined now by the CBC's Marina von Stackelberg. Okay, Marina, can you explain exactly what the government is doing here?
Yeah, so it's going to use Section 107 of the Canada Labour Code, which is essentially the portion of the code that the Labour Minister has used to solve pretty much every other major labour dispute we've seen so far this year. But this is not binding arbitration. Instead, what he's going to do is send it to the Canada Industrial Relations Board to decide essentially if Canada Post and the union are far enough away that they're far from getting a deal. And if the Labour Board agrees with the minister, he says he hopes they do, then the Labour Board will send these workers essentially back to work. He says it could happen as early as next week. The thing here is that this is getting to be a very serious situation for Canadians. He gave some numbers today about just how bad it's gotten. 1.65 million pieces of government mail that haven't gone out. 190,000 passports now that have not been mailed to people, and 50,000 permanent resident cards. The CFIB, Canadian Federation of Independent Business, says about $100 million have been lost every single day of this strike. And so the Labour Minister was asked today, did you wait too long to do this? Should you have intervened sooner? Have a listen.
We do have a labour code in Canada. It does afford unions the right to strike. They, and they alone, selected the timing of this, they, meaning the parties, so because there's a strike and a lockout in effect, it also must be underscored. And these parties have not reached an agreement on their own for a long, long time. I wanted to give them every possibility of doing that. We devoted every bit of mediation and other resources that we could. I myself have had direct discussions with these parties on many occasions. We wanted to reach a sustainable agreement between these parties, but obviously this week, in fact, as I said in my remarks, the talks took a turn for the worse.
And, you know, the federal mediator, the special mediator that MacKinnon appointed, has said, you know, for a number of weeks that the two sides have not really gotten anywhere closer. Right. In fact, they're not even at the negotiating table right now. MacKinnon also said that he's going to appoint this special commissioner who will essentially look at this issue of why Canada Post and the union cannot get consensus and report back in the spring. Now, Canada Post today is not giving any interviews, but they did provide us with a statement. They did say they're hoping to get things back up and running as soon as possible and said, our commitment has always been to reach negotiated agreements with the Canadian Union of Postal Workers that would help us better serve the changing needs of Canadians and provide good jobs to those who provide the service. We remain committed to doing so within this new process while also meeting the postal needs of Canadians. Now, the union says that this is basically pouring bathwater on this whole process because they said that essentially this is a situation where they can go on strike and the company can just rely on the fact that the federal government is going to let it go on for a couple weeks and then order everyone back to work.
Right. This is back-to-back negotiations, though, that have required either back-to-work legislation and now these extraordinary measures. So what does this decision mean for labor disputes going forward, potentially?
Yeah, you talked about back-to-work, and often in labor disputes you have back-to-work legislation. And, you know, this would be a process where it has to go through Parliament. It needs to be voted on. The opposition gets to weigh in. But now we see the federal government using this unique sort of way in the labor code. And I talked to an expert on this, a labor law expert, about what he makes of the federal government doing this. Have a listen.
It was a surprise to many of us when we saw this little known provision in the Canada Labour Code being used by the minister and used in such a promiscuous fashion to end all of these strikes and lockouts in the federally regulated industries. And I think it defeats, you know, a basic democratic accountability provision to have the government defend its decisions in Parliament, with the opposition allowed to be able to question the government and present alternatives to why this legislation shouldn't go through. bypassing all of that, I think, winds up lessening the importance of labor law and the right to strike in our country.
And that expert, Michael Link, says it's very likely that this union will take this issue to court and try and fight and essentially say that the federal government has infringed on their constitutional right to strike. But the chances are that could be well over a year before a judge makes a decision on that. We don't know who the Labour Minister will be then.
Okay, Marina, thank you so much. That's the CBC's Marina von Stackelberg. Well, if the Canada Industrial Relations Board does find the parties are at an impasse in negotiations, more than 55,000 workers could be ordered back to work. Among other things, the Postal Workers Union is asking for a wage increase of 19% over 4 years, but Canada Post says that demand is unaffordable and unsustainable. The company is offering 11.5% over 4 years instead. Jim Gallant is a negotiator for the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, and he joins me now. Jim Gallant, it's good to see you again. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us on.
You've been striking for a month at an impasse. Basically, all of it, to be frank, has gotten worse, they say, in the last couple of weeks. Are you surprised by the Labour Minister's decision today?
Well, I'm shocked but not surprised. He kept saying he wasn't going to do it, but we knew that sooner or later most governments do something. So this is what happened. The part of the law that he's using to do it is being challenged in court, and I guess we'll have to be added to that list.
The Canadian Industrial Relations Board, if they determine negotiations are deadlocked and can't move forward, they can order you back to work, extend your collective agreement until May of next year, which is what the minister says. Do you agree negotiations are deadlocked? It seems like there is no progress.
Well, negotiations are always deadlocked until you come to an agreement, so it's a matter of when that deadlock's going to be broken, and the minister has now instructed the CIRB to do something, and they report to the minister. So I'm not quite sure. He's like using them like a police force or a judge and jury to figure out the same thing that he has decided. And they report to him, so I don't see how there could be a different outcome.
So what will you say to the board then, though? That, like, because CUPW will get to present its argument to the Industrial Relations Board. He's going to say that this is a done deal because they report to the minister, or will you make an argument to convince him that you should be allowed to keep striking?
Well, sitting here now, I haven't seen all the documents. The
Right.
minister didn't provide them. He did it on TV. But I would say, as one of the negotiators, the Canada Post negotiated to an impasse. And I believe that was predetermined, that they knew that there wouldn't be a binding arbitration order. Because in Canada, if you are in a binding arbitration, there's a theory called replication, and collective agreements need to look like they would if they were bargained between the two parties. And they've basically taken that off the table and given the arbitrator, Mr. Kaplan, a bigger problem to deal with, and that's the structure of Canada Post.
Right, but your collective agreement would be extended until May of next year, so it wouldn't end your ability to negotiate an extension to the collective agreement. It would just push the timeline out to remediate some of the economic damage that the government and small businesses argue this is doing at this time of the year.
Well, I don't know if you've seen something that I haven't, but I'm not under the impression that we do have the ability to bargain another collective agreement. At this point, he's appointed a commissioner to do an impact assessment at Canada Post. So I don't know that we can bargain another collective agreement while he's doing that.
Okay, well, I thought, well, yes, but the extension, right now your agreement is expired, correct?
Correct.
So if they extend it until May of 2025, maybe I'm wrong in my assumption, but I presumed then the normal course of collective bargaining would resume once Mr. Kaplan, the arbitrator, has done his work and you get towards the expiration of that agreement.
Well, you're right. It could happen then, I guess. But again, it'll be about the words of
Right.
the law, and it's not a law that he's putting down, but the instructions that he's putting down. So we'll have to deal with those as they come. And obviously, we want to get to a bargain collective agreement, and the minister has said the best one's at a table, and at this point, that's not going to happen.
But you know, Canada Post and CUPW don't seem to be able to get bargaining done at the table. You were legislated back to work last time. Now this measure has had to be taken. You know, we've heard from management and heard from the union, and the gap there is enormous in terms of what they're offering and what you're demanding. And the minister basically has asked Bill Kaplan to look at the entire structure of Canada Post and this climate of why this keeps happening. I mean, what does that say to you about the industrial relations climate inside your company?
Oh, I could have told you about the industrial relations between the union and management, Canada Post, years ago, but it's that's not really the problem. We've negotiated collective agreements, even though we don't see eye to eye on things. And this is about fundamental change from the top to the bottom. And the union does not want things, for instance, like extreme numbers of part-time employees when it can be done with full-time employees. And the government and an arm of the government shouldn't be looking for that. And that's what it seems like the minister is supporting by ordering us back to work in this manner.
But, you know, when we spoke to Canada Post management, they were saying, for example, that there are cleaning staff that are not in the union, that are contracted out, and long-haul truck drivers, for example, who are not part of the union, but are whatever, have a separate commercial arrangement with Canada Post that you're trying to bring in as full-time unionized employees at the bargaining table. Why, when the company is losing money, you know, you can disagree over the amounts, but Canada Post is not profitable and there is no appetite to put more money into it, according to the government, would you look to expand and build out the permanent workforce of Canada Post when it threatens the financial health of the entire organization?
Well, the problem is that long-haul truckers weren't one of the things that were on the table at the end, but there were about 150 workers that were cleaners and people that deliver parcels in some towns and cities across the country. And those 150 people, to bring them into the bargaining unit and make them have a living wage, somebody like me would have been willing to give up 1 cent per hour with 55,000 people. That 1 cent per hour drives their wages up by $2.80. So those were the sorts of things we were talking about doing. This wasn't on the back of the corporation. We would have been willing to take 1 cent less to get those people unionized. And in 2003, we brought in the rural and suburban mail carriers that are one of the 2 collective agreements that are on the line right now. And now those workers are unionized and not taken advantage of. A lot of these other units, like the rural and suburban mail carriers, are predominantly women. And the union has a real spot in our heart to make sure that they're paid properly like we are.
So, look, the next step is the Industrial Relations Board is going to make some sort of a ruling. If they do order your members to down tools and go back to work, will you comply with that?
I won't, but I'm off full-time. But individuals will make that decision themselves. This is a real problem for us with the Canadian Charter of Rights being breached by the government. And they do it way too often. And if workers make that decision, workers at CP and workers at WestJet and workers at the ports are all getting the same thing. The government might, sooner or later, the government's going to get a reaction from that.
Okay, but if individual members of CUPW don't go back to work, they're going to be subject to discipline by the employer, right? Like this will be a legal order to end your strike and go back. So, I mean, what is the union's position on this, on whether or not the members should go back to work and comply with this order?
Until that order is found to be illegal, because the minister is using 107 in a way it wasn't intended. Law professors are all commenting that this is an illegal way to use 107. So, is it a legal order for me to go back to work?
Well, look, I'm not a lawyer, you're not a lawyer. We're not going to settle that here, but the Canadian Industrial Relations Board does have legal purview, right? And if it gives you this order to go back to work, I mean, you're leaving me with the impression, Jim Glant, that people may defy this, that Canada Post may not end its strike, Canada Post workers may not end their strike and go back to work even if the CIRB says they have to do that.
We don't control everybody's actions.
Right, but you can give guidance to them, right? As union leadership and as negotiators, like what would be the official advice from the head of CUPW on this?
I'm not the head of CUPW.
No, but you're here as a negotiator speaking on behalf of them, right?
Yeah.
So you've been authorized to speak.
I've been authorized to speak, but not on that subject.
Okay, so you haven't taken a position as a union?
No. We don't know what the CIRB is going to say at this point. And we haven't seen what the minister has in writing.
Okay. Well, Jim Glant, you got an interesting week ahead. That's Jim Glant, CUPW negotiator. Thanks for being here today, sir.
Thank you.